Never was the world so open to new truths and to the spiritual as today. There is an openness, a responsiveness, and expectancy. It is revealed as one rides across the countryside with the television aerials on nearly every house and building, just as though everything was reaching up to catch anything that's precious. While those aerials go up to get views and sounds of this material world, we can well see it's merely a symbolism of an inner upreaching from the hearts and souls of men. We're counting on those aerials in you as we gather here. I'm counting on that tonight. For my father was president of a fire insurance company, and I discovered that lightning never strikes a house from above. It strikes it from below. A little leader comes down, and then the great voltage comes up from below and flashes up and down along that leader, and everyone thinks that it all comes from above. All we're doing here is to send out some leaders, and we expect the voltage to come up. And if you have your aerials up, you're going to really catch something, because every once in a while the speaker gets a little twisted, and instead of something coming from him, he becomes merely a channel, and something comes from heaven itself. A minister announced, next Sunday I'm going to preach the greatest sermon ever preached. Now, of all things, to announce that in advance. Of course, all his friends went with hope and expectancy, and whatever enemies he had, they found took that as a good opportunity to speculate on what a conceited man he must be. And when they arrived, he announced that he was going to recite, or rather he just proceeded to recite the Sermon on the Mount. And when he finished, he said, if any of you know of a greater sermon, I'd be glad to have you tell it to me. Gandhi, who refused to become a Christian because, among other things, he couldn't find a so-called Christian nation that dared to use the Sermon on the Mount in statesmanship, he took the Sermon on the Mount in one hand and the Bhagavad Gita in the other and went around India, and without the firing of a gun, but simply depending upon the nonviolence and the love, everything expressed and putting into practice this Sermon on the Mount, he liberated 1/5 the human race from the greatest empire that's ever existed. I'm here to tell you that you can liberate yourself from any tyranny, any bondage. You can meet any problem in relationship man to affairs, to heaven itself, if you just take this. For it is divided into 3 sections. The first third deals with our relationship with man. The second, our relationship with God. The third, it takes the essential things in both and weave them together in a perfect technique of prayer. Almost nothing like it when we really look into it thoroughly. All that we need to know about our human relations can be found in the 5th chapter of Matthew. How should we divide up people? Is our adjustment based upon race? Treat the Japanese one way, the Chinese another, the Germans another, the Negroes another, and the whites another? No. Do we treat them by nationalities? No. I usually can announce, and I could have announced that sneeze in advance, but driving in the automobiles, I always do announce it so that the driver will not run off the track. I don't have hay fever or any of those things, but I majored in Greek in college, and the Greek's legend was that whenever you sneezed, that meant that God was approving of what you were saying. I have found Negroes exactly the same as the white people, the Indians in India the same way. In fact, I was talking with a Negro minister, and I thought I was talking with Roland Brown once. And I finally began to call him Roland. I looked up and I saw that his skin was a little darker. But you'll find every type in every race. But there is a classification. Not the classification a woman worked out when she's in selecting folks for a reception. She wanted to have things well balanced, and she thought, amazing discovery. You could divide all people into two classes, chemically speaking, the bromides and the sulfites. The sulfites, you always knew what they were going to say, but the bromide, the bromide, you always knew what they were going to say, but you never knew what the sulfite was going to say. The bromide is one who always says, I can remember names, but I can't, faces, but I can't remember names. And my, how you have grown. When they meet you, I'm pleased to meet you. When they leave, I had a very nice time. Bromide will say to his bride, honey, pass me some more of those hot biscuits. The sulfite will say, hey, you little battle axe, hand me some more of those burnt offerings. But Jesus didn't divide them that way. He said there is a natural relationship that's naturally drawn to you, and you have a right to respect it. Some that you're naturally drawn to, some that you're not naturally drawn to, and some that you just do business with, neither nor. Those that you are drawn to, you have a special duty. Those that you're married to, and your family, and all that, to love them. And then there's certain negative, positive poles. There are certain ones you're drawn to naturally. You fit together. Mutuals. Jesus himself respected it. After selecting 12 disciples, when he wanted to go very far, he took Peter and James and John. Now, with those that you feel naturally drawn to, you should love them, but don't let your love go overboard into possessiveness or lust or infatuation. Those that you're not naturally drawn to, you should respect just as much as if you were drawn to them. It's just a part of the economy of the universe that they should find their mutualities in other relationships. If you go to Harvard, don't think that everybody that goes to Yale is out of this, as creatures of the devil. Don't think, as we used to think when they came into this nation, that and this nation was first invaded by the whites, that the only good Indian is a dead Indian. All that is all wrong. We tried to label the Nazis as the horrible creatures, and then the Japanese, we called them little demons, and now we're just embracing them and all that. But the point is this. If I am attending Harvard, and we put the signs up, to hell with Yale, all over the campus, before the Yale game, that's all right. That's a part of good sport and all, but you should respect those, and don't call them thou fool and all that sort of thing. But then they raise the question, supposing you treat them with respect, but they don't treat you with respect. A Yale man said to you, a Harvard man, yes. Did you see those signs? Yes, I think they're cute, don't you? And then he hails off and slaps you on the cheek. All right, turn the other cheek, and then he'll apologize. You'll notice that every time. And those that you do, supposing you don't go too far in infatuation with the folks that you are drawn to, supposing they do. And they want you to go a mile out of the way with them. All right, go 2 miles, and then they'll get bored, and they'll get cured. I do want to say that I think I've found people have more harm by their friends than by their enemies. I have had more people, women of 50, right in the prime of life, say, I couldn't come to Camps Farthest Out because my mother still treats me. She's just as possessive. She treats me as if I was a little girl yet. She said, I brought you up, I brought you in the world, and here you want to go to a camp farthest out and leave me here all alone. And your first duty is to me. I know parents that are so possessive, our husbands and wives so possessive, they won't even let them go out of their sight. This possessiveness and all that can do a great deal of harm. So he said, he advised her about our love there, and about those who we're not drawn to. Don't treat them as enemies. Be glad. I suppose at McAllister College, with hundreds and hundreds of students, if everybody came to my classes, they'd have worn me out. And supposing I'd have been jealous of all the students that didn't come to my classes and went to take biology under Dr. Walters, and I would be jealous of them and say, thou fool. The point is, be glad. In the economy of the universe, some are there. Be glad that the Japanese are working out their problems over there, and we don't have to run over there and pick them up and love them all the time. Our duty is with those around us. Then those that you do business with, what should you do? Why, treat them with absolute trust all the way. Let their word be as good as their bond. If they don't want to sign a note, they don't have to. You just trust them. Well, supposing they steal the shirt off your back. All right, then give them your vest and your coat also. And you'll find that anything that's taken from you when you do it on the Sermon on the Mount basis, that it will come back to you. Anyone that takes anything from you, they'll lose it and something besides. Out of kindness to them, urge them to give it back, not for your sake, but for theirs, because they're breaking a law. I have preached all this philosophy to my college students, and it made a tremendous impression upon them. One boy, he was a very belonged to the intelligentsia type, not a bit of the religious type. He just followed me everywhere, listened to everything I said. And one day he said, you know, you're the only prophet ever got in the Atlantic Monthly, and that gave him away. He was worshiping my intellect. That's all he wanted. But one day he came to my office and he said, Prof, your philosophy didn't work. You said to trust people. I said, yes, that's what I said. If my philosophy didn't work, I know Jesus' philosophy worked, but what was the matter? I was coming to a play practice. I was in the last act, didn't have to come till very late, and I was coming down the Snelling Avenue, and I could hear footsteps behind me, and I suspected that somebody seemed to be following me, and I got a little suspicious, but you said trust people. When I crossed Grand Avenue, I felt tempted to go down to the next corner, the drugstore, and walk in the drugstore and kind of shake off that feeling, but I didn't. You said to trust them, so I went across the dark campus, and I was under the young trees. A gun was stuck in my ribs, and put 'em up, buddy, and he took my watch. Well, my philosophy didn't work. Well, I knew that didn't mean that anything failed in that Sermon on the Mount. Something was wrong, but I didn't say anything. Next week he came in, he shut the door, and he sat down. He said, Prof, I think I ought to tell you that my father found that watch in the back seat of a taxi 3 years ago. And he refused. Mother's urging him to put it in the lost and found announcements in the paper, and he gave it to me. Ladies and gentlemen, if any of you are carrying lost watches, be awfully careful when you go across a dark campus. If you've got any stocks and bonds that you didn't get legally, you see they're safely locked up in the strongest safe. But if everything you got you earned legitimately, just leave your doors unlocked. You're safe. I do. If a burglar would come in some night and say, don't move, I've come to steal your money, I say, just wait a minute. Turn on the light, and I'll get up and look with you, and between the two of us, we might find something. When I have my car loaded with a lot of my books, I don't ever lock my car door. If anybody came out and stole a few, any robber, I know it would convert him, and he'd have another soul saved. But at any rate, these things work. And then he ended that great chapter with a psalm prayer on love. And he carried that love way, way, way up. Everything in this chapter doesn't stop halfway. It goes farthest out. That's why we have to give it this. If you want to be angels, you've got to go farthest out. He said, I'm not talking about the little picayune, anemic kind of love where you love your neighbor. Anyone does that, even the pagans. I'm telling you, have your love big enough to love your enemies and forgive those who despitefully use you and be kind to those who persecute you. Why, the rain falls on the good and the bad. The sun shines upon the just and the unjust. And if your love is big enough for that, then you know what you are? Well, you're perfect. You're perfect as the angels? Oh, more than that. You're perfect then as your heavenly Father is perfect. Walter Fiskus this morning said you could just let Christ fill you and become almost little Christ. I want to say, if you forgive all your enemies, your friends will just see Christ walking down the road. They may not see it in you, but they'll say, I felt a spirit there. I feel there's something there. Did you ever realize that? Or when you, I'd like to say another place where you, where the perfect comes out in you is when you're weak. I was walking through the halls one day, the college halls, and I suddenly felt almost a whisper like of heaven flow into me as I passed a group of students, and I stopped and looked at them. They just started there, boys and girls, laughing, talking. And the next day walking, and again I felt that just as though the window of heaven had opened. And there's a group going by, and I looked, and I noticed there's the one little sad-looking little girl that had been in both times. And then the time I was walking through the hall and met her, past her, and again I felt that. I said, just wait a minute, Vera. You got a few minutes? She said, yes, I was just going down to the library to study. Well, come to my office. I want to talk to you. I said, 3 times I felt a power, as though I was passing an angel when I passed you. Can you tell me where it comes from? Well, I can't understand that. My mother's awfully sick, and I've been just carrying a weight these last few days. I just praying to the Lord all the time. I'm just a kind of walking with him in my hand in his. I don't feel I could be given any strength. I want help. I want strength. If you walk past a person who has forgiven folks, forgiven his enemies, you'll feel it even more powerful. When I went to St. Paul 43 years ago, my wife came down with typhoid. We'd hoped to have babies, but it didn't look like we'd ever have any now. Because she's in hospital 9 weeks, I wasn't expected to live half the time. I would hurry from my lonely apartment building to the hospital, rush to the college, teach my classes, rush up to the hospital, rush back to my lonely apartment building until the strain, sometimes began to wear on me, almost breaking under it. Some night I'd be phoned at midnight. Your wife, the doctor thinks maybe she's dying. Can you come? And I had no automobile, no streetcars ran that direction. It's a mile away. I'd trained for a mile run in college. I'd go slip under my clothes, and I'd run that mile run, about 6 minutes. Get there all panting, faint almost. Why, that began to tell on me. Every Sunday I went to hear a minister. I went to the church, but I never went back. I'd go to another church. I've told this to ministers. I wasn't looking for a great church building, for a great congregation, for a great choir, for a great oration. I was looking for a man that was described in the second verse of the 32nd chapter of Isaiah. And a man shall be as a covert from the storm, as a shelter from the wind, as rivers of water in a dry desert place, as the shadow of a mighty rock in the weary land. I wanted to be like someone, if I could just stand beside him, I could just, in the scorching heat of the desert, 110 in the shade, or no shade. I saw a little calf, just newly born, lying on that burning desert. But was it safe? Yes, because the mother cow had stood there, and it created the shadow of a mighty rock. I wanted to be, as some ministers, I shook hands with him. I could feel quiet spaces in him. But no, he had to go, he'd take care of the next one. I was looking for a man who had quiet spaces, and I couldn't find them. I have found some since, as the years have gone by, and then I resolved that if I can find one, I'm going to try to make myself one. And the way to do it is to have those quiet times and be alone with Christ. Wasted time, And I found no. But I found you can have quiet spaces with God, as long as you hold unforgiveness in your heart toward anyone, even your enemy. So I find that if you want to be perfect, be a real angel, that's the first thing to do, is to forgive, and then you'll be perfect as the Father in heaven is perfect. The next chapter, he deals with man's relationship with God, and he mentions three ways. One is by prayer, one is by stewardship, and one is by fasting, or relinquishment, I would call it. Relinquishing something you hold valuable. Now, prayer, we all know that, but he said don't pray in the public just for show. It should be a secret thing, where it's really a relationship between you and God. If the others around you are in tune, you can do it before others, but be sure that the central thing is there and not to show off. And then the giving alms. I have found that stewardship is almost as vital a means of reaching God as prayer. After my wife and I began to tithe long before we could afford it, I didn't do it for a long time because she worried about money. I said, "Then you quit worrying," but she still didn't. But after we began to tithe, then she quit worrying. After the moment we tithe, all that we needed came to us. The Mormons all tithe. They have abundance. They could produce anything. If we could work right in conjunction with them, and they would finance what we were doing, we could save the world for peace in 3 years. That is, Secretary Benson, the Mormon, is the one that nearly always leads them in prayer. I have found that just as you have a blood transfusion, and that gives you a sense of partnership with another, there's businessmen, some of them that say, "I haven't that mystic quality, can reach God through prayer." When I've urged them to set aside a sum and go into partnership with God, I have found marvelous things coming into their lives. If I could induce all the Christians, if all the Protestants of America would tithe, we would accomplish everything we needed. Gordon Cosby in Washington has a church that's grown too big, so he has another church started, and they use his church is called the Church of the Savior. Now they've got a church of the Lord, I think. I forget the name. And they meet in the afternoon. And they use the church. I said, "How large is his church?" "Oh, there's 75 in it, and he thinks it's too large. He'd like to bring it down about 50. "What? How can they support it?" "Oh, they have a budget of $50,000. Well, how do they do it? Why, they all tithe. No one can join his church who doesn't tithe. Catherine Marshall belongs to that church. She's left her church, Peter Marshall's church, because she's found this is such a vital church. You have a church where they all tithe and all pray. You've got something, and if you want power, you go to Gordon Cosby's church. And I said, "How many are in the other church?" "Oh, there's just about 14. But they use the place. They don't have to pay any rent. And they raise enough money to pay the minister's salary. We could do everything when we begin to tithe." Now, there's another method, he said. Then he said, fasting. Now, I have found that we don't need to fast here to help the world. Over there, they do. Whenever you don't eat food in Palestine, you're saving some others from starvation, because there's only a certain amount to go around. But I have found when there's a real need of relinquishment. A woman called me up. Her son was dying of infantile paralysis. She said 6 doctors left the house, said he won't live through the day. He's been paralyzed from the neck down for a week. He's having 2 convulsions a minute for the last 4 hours. He has a temperature of 104. And I said, "Well, now, how'd you know if he lived, how kind of his life might be?" Life is almost like hell for lots of people. Maybe the Lord was doing a kind thing by taking him into heaven. Supposing he should grow to manhood, and the president should appoint him Secretary of State and invite him to come to sit at his right hand in Washington. You wouldn't keep him at home and have him remain as a kind of a drugstore clerk or something. I should say not. I'd want what was best for the boy. Well, now, Washington isn't to compare with heaven, and the president doesn't compare with the Lord. Supposing the Lord wants him to come to heaven and sit at his right hand. Now, if that were best for the boy, would you be willing? If it is best for the boy. I said, now, if you'll pray in that way and relinquish your boy, tell the Father exactly what you want, and just put him in utterly in the Lord's hands and say, do whatever you want and whatever's best for the boy. I can pray for you with power. An hour later, she called up and said, I've been on my knees for an hour. I told the Lord, this isn't the son of mine. He's the son of God's. He's just loaned to me. I'm putting him back in your hands, and I'm willing to accept with radiant acquiescence whatever's best for the boy. In 3 months, that boy is back in school without even a limp. The more I can find people, here's a person comes to me, business failing, absolutely failing. Are you willing to lose that business if necessary? Why, maybe the Lord has something better for you. If you'll relinquish, let go of it, and not say, Lord, you've got to make a success, you've got to bring sales, you've got to do this. If you'll just relinquish the whole thing, pass from it as well, just do without it for a while. Give it entirely in his hands and see what happens. Well, I might be hungry for eggs, and my old hen wants to set, and I put 13 eggs under, and I have to fast from eggs. But at the end of 3 weeks, we have 13 other little chickens, and they grow up, and then I have all the eggs I can eat. I have found that, I won't go into detail on it, but because there is something got to adjust that thing of fasting into a modern terms, I found it the most vigorous way of getting in touch with God. Schweitzer fasted from his love of playing the organ, from the philosophy, theology, all the things where he's great in, went down, threw himself into the study of medicine, went down to darkest Africa, and he's considered the great saint of modern times. He doesn't know how to pray, half as well as most of you. I have written him. He has written me. I have read about him, and he doesn't have half the faith. I put him down very frankly. I don't put him down as nearly as great a saint as Frank Laubach. Doesn't compare with him, really, but he's caught the attention of the world because in one area, he didn't make money and give stewardship, no. He doesn't know how to pray especially effectively, but he did fast from these things to go into the thing that he felt was most precious, where the need was, and he's become a symbol that is powerful, and through that he has drawn thousands of people to the Lord and to religion, more so than those who know how to pray, maybe. There are all these different ways, but there you have it. Everything you need to know about reaching God is summed up in that chapter, if you know how to interpret it. And then he ends that chapter with a psalm prayer, not on love. Shouldn't you have love for God? Well, the first thing there is trust. Have faith. The most infinite, all-the-way faith. Again, it is 99%. Take no anxious thought for the morrow, what you shall eat and what you shall drink. Almost foolish recklessness. Just seek first the kingdom and its righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. A Unitarian minister just tore that to pieces. His sermon was printed. I got a copy of it. He said that is the most foolish advice ever could be given. Of course you should take anxious thought for the morrow. Folks, he failed to see the significant thing, which was the parable in it. The parable was of the lily of the field. Look at the lily of the field. It doesn't do any worrying or anxious thought. Why? Because it is open to its source of life, rain and sun. But if you build a lean-to of anger and a shed of fear, and then put a nice solid roof of selfishness, you think that lily could last for 2 days. It had better take an awful lot of anxious thought. So there's a lot of work needed in preparation for it, and then you can go all the way with what Jesus said. For instance, last night I talked about overcoming anger and fear if you want to become an angel. You can't say, now, I trust the Lord in everything. Why is it that he doesn't meet my needs? I trusted him. Is anybody you hate? There certainly is. I love everybody, but there's one person I have righteous indignation against. Why, that righteous indignation is called the vice of the virtuous. More people think they have a right to do some of that righteous indignation and shut off all the doors and the roof, and then they wonder why these things don't work. Well, do you have any fear? I tell you, I have an awful lot of worry. Worried all day at times. then you better take some anxious thought. Remove all these things, and then you don't have to take any anxious thought. Go all the way. Then comes the 7th chapter, which deals with, I thought at first, just a sort of all the leftovers that he couldn't fit into the other chapters. I've written books, and I've had more ideas sometimes than I could use, and I say, well, now these ideas are too good to waste. I'll put them in the appendix, or I have a little kind of a catch-all, a kind of a wastebasket to throw them in. I usually end up by taking them out of the catch-all and putting them in the real wastebasket. It's better. But at any rate, it wasn't until some years ago, well up in my maturity, I made a great discovery that 7th chapter was a beautiful mosaic, putting pieces together in a most remarkable way. And I'll tell you exactly what it was. Jesus practically said, now, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, I've told you so much, I'm going to sum up the essential things in those first 2 sections. The things that you must obey and follow if you want prayers to be answered. First, I'll give you the 2 essentials in your relationship to man that are absolutely essentials if you want power in your prayer. One thing you must not do and one thing that you must do. The thing you must not do in relationship to man is to judge. Judge not, lest ye be judged. That is awfully true. And if you're in a prayer group and you find you're judging somebody, or there's somebody judging somebody else, split the prayer group up, say the time's come to subdivide, and there's no power in prayer if you sit in judgment. And then he used an illustration drawn from his carpenter trade that rather thrilled me, because my brother was a carpenter, and I had seen an experience in a house my brother was erecting. A friend and I walked in, and one of my brother's carpenters was sawing away on a beam up above, and one of those little motes trickling down, and my friend looked up, and it got in his eye, and he began to make horrible grimaces that really looked comical if you looked at it from the funny side, and the fat chap coming in the other entrance saw him and burst into loud guffaws of laughter. And so everybody turned and looked at where he was looking. Another carpenter was coming in with a big beam over his shoulder. He saw everybody looking this way. He hurled around quick to see, and the beam struck the laughing chap right under the eye. And I wondered if Jesus had seen something like that. We divide into prayer groups, and we started today, and we think there'll be power in them. There'll be more power tomorrow, more power the next day, as you build into that harmony and homogeneity. We drew numbers, just like that. But at Coronas one year, we divided into some prayer groups, and then, to my horror, I found that all the most powerful praying folks of the Northwest had been drawn by the fall of the lot into one prayer group. And I said, isn't that too bad? They should have been distributed around and kind of leavened the other groups. Well, the second day I was to lead them, and I went in with a sigh, now there's going to be great power. And I found no power at all. Why, everything was a dud, because I don't think our prayers hit the ceiling. Well, I knew something's the matter, but it was puzzled me like everything. Starr Daily led them the next day, and then Harding the next day, and we 3 got together. I said, fellas, come in here. Did you have my experience I had at that prayer group? And they said, what do you mean? I said, I found no power. And Starr Daily said, I found no power at all. Something's the matter. Glenn Harding said, I didn't find any power, so I thought there's something the matter with me. Glenn Harding is the director of the Koinonia Foundation, and he's the most humble of the men on the face of the earth. If there's anything the matter, he never blames anyone else. He blames himself. He thought there must be something. I said, no, Glenn. When 3 of us find it, there must be something the matter, and we don't know what it is. The next day, I believe Marie Daly led it, and she said, I don't see anything the matter with that group. It's the most powerful group I've ever led. At supper time, a dear old lady, Mrs. Russell, 80 years old, she was played the music for Alice Sanford, Alice Craft's rhythms. She said, I am of the Quaker type, and I sometimes stay away from meetings and go down to the lake And during the prayer hour time, I sat sitting on a bench watching the lake, and a Negro woman came and sat down at the other end. And I said, "Why aren't you in your prayer group?" "Oh," she said, "I'm in a prayer group," and she mentioned this particular one. And I thought there'd be a lot of power there because such wonderful folks in it, and I found there wasn't. But I've just discovered there's one woman there that takes offense at my presence. I thought maybe if I stayed away there'd be power, and there was. That night I got up and gave the address before the campers, and I told, without telling which one it was, how there's no power in a group he anticipated there'd be great power. And how it was revealed that there's one woman in that evidently took offense in a Negro woman's presence. We happen to have Negro women in nearly all the groups so that no one could fix any fault on anyone. But the woman who took offense realized that she was to blame. She sought out that Negro woman, begged her forgiveness, besought her to come back again, and after that the power was tremendous. But there it is. If you're in a prayer group where there's tension and misunderstanding and criticism and judgment, it isn't a prayer group. That's all there's to it. He laid down a law there that is so true. We proved it over and over again at the camps. And if you're the cause of it, step out. If there's two persons out, if there's one person alone that's to blame, get together and pray with them about it, or even talk with them, and advise them perhaps to stay away or do something. But it's one of those things that you have a right to go into. That's the things you mustn't do, but what should you do? What's the positive thing? Why, the positive thing is to do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Don't need anything more. That's there. Then in relationship to God, there's one thing you must not do, and there's one thing you must do. Notice how they're arranged just like sights, like that. A positive and a negative in both places. You get your aim just right, pull the trigger, and you'll hit the mark. If you can follow this now through, and you'll find a perfect technique of prayer that will hit the mark just as sure. Jesus said, straight's the way. It isn't if you say, I'm not going to follow this little laws. I'm going to have my little pet peeves and hate folks just as much as ever. I'm not going to stop that. It's a luxury to me. I enjoy it. Well, you're just blunderbuss all around. Your prayers won't be answered. Straight's the way. And then he said, by their fruits you shall know them. And if you keep missing the mark, make an examination and see which one of these marks are out of line. Well, let's at least see these marks now about the relationship to God. The thing that you must not do in relationship to God is to blaspheme or demean holy things, expose them to scoffing. Don't scoff them yourself, but don't even expose them to scoffing. We'll have a prayer here. We'll have a broadcast for the world before the week is over, and it may be a thrilling time. They felt it was last time. And supposing you go down here to town to get a malted milk or something, and you go in, there's a bunch of folks around, say, you know, we sent a broadcast of love to the White House and things. You're going to see the effect of it, and you just watch the papers some of these days, and then you go out, and then they turn around and they say, oh, yeah, there's another crackpot, and you have spilled actually as if you were opened your arteries. Power's gone out of that prayer. You've done harm to it. If you're praying for someone, well, here it is. The greatest millionaire Presbyterian church of the Twin Cities. A lot of our rich trustees live there. One of them came down with an illness. His wife came out and had me pray for him. But it wasn't so very serious. I prayed a lot more seriously, but my prayers hit the ceiling. I wondered what was the matter. She said the whole church is praying for him. So I asked one of the members, one of the elders, what the latest news was. So, well, he's not getting along very well. Isn't it too bad that a man in his prime like that has to die? Isn't that too bad? I said, are you praying? Oh, he said the whole church is praying for him. He give him the Lord every night. I give him the Lord every night. But isn't it too bad he's got to die? It's just too bad. I know he's going to die, but in other words, everyone there knew he's going to die, and my prayers hit the wall, ceiling. Better not blaspheme the power of prayer by spreading it around too much. Then if she had just come and told me and no one else, and we'd gotten a little group together, we'd have had a whole lot more chance than when you spread it out. And then there's others might actually be scoffing at it. So there's a danger of scoffing. I'd given a series of talks in Harry Emerson Fosdick's church back in 1929. When Saturday came, I was to give an address in Dr. Buttrick's church, the famous Madison Avenue Presbyterian church. I took dinner with Mr. Buttrick, and then we went in, and I thought, wow, this will be wonderful. How would I have this a wonderful time? And I found I just couldn't. My whole talk was bouncing back from against a stone wall. Fortunately, I had that written out. It was a good one. Later it came out, I think, in one of the chapters in one of my books. And I just almost had to read it. Oh, it was the heaviest thing I ever ran across. The next noon, I took lunch with Dr. and Mrs. Daniel Fleming of the Union Theological Seminary, and Miss Bertha Condé, who is one of the great spiritual leaders of the time. This is 30 years ago. She was dressing women, college women everywhere. Marvelously sensitive, intuitive, a psychic type of woman. She said, Glenn Clark, I didn't hear a word you say there at Madison Avenue Church last night. A man came in and sat in front of me who exuded such cynicism and scoffing and criticism. I spent the whole hour praying that either that would leave him or that he would get up and leave the place, and he didn't. So I didn't hear you. And Mr. and Mrs. Fleming, they smiled at each other. One of them nodded, and they said, well, I think we should tell you. We saw the man. He's a professor in the Union Theological Seminary, and he was very jealous that you were given that assignment to speak instead of him. You know, folks, I think more harm is done to the Christian faith in the jealousy and the backbiting between religious leaders. Why, that's one reason why I established the Camp Farthest Out. I'll tell you why. I used to go to the student conferences. Great, they come from 8 different states, 800 students in those old days. And here'd be an evangelist, and here'd be a psychologist. The evangelist thought the psychologist was the son of the devil. The psychologist thought the evangelist was an old fogey. They hated each other. Then I found that when we met to discuss things, or who should speak tomorrow, everyone was jealous. Each one wanted to get up and make the speech, the main speech. So I said, well, let's leave me with my little prayer group. And I won't argue about that. Let you folks do the leading. And we found out at these camps, when we have that perfect harmony, there's power. And here you come because you're hungry for prayer, and they didn't have anything about prayer, excepting in my group. They discussed all kinds of things, how to increase the YMCA, how to raise money, and all this mechanical thing. And I said, if I'm going to get a group of where they'll all be in harmony, make only one thing central, all denominations can meet, and where we can find release in the body, the mind, and the soul, and go out to apply it in every branch of life. Well, do not, so Jesus said, put it in a unique way. Don't give that pearls before swine. Those are the materialist-minded. They'll trample them under their feet. And there's another class must be very careful of, and it's a rather strange class. They're the church leaders in other denominations or groups that don't agree with you. They're the watchdogs. They're the watchdogs to see that every area of orthodoxy is followed. Some of them don't believe that there ever was a single miracle ever happened after the Bible ended. Anyone who says you can heal or do anything without prayer is unorthodox. And they will say, they will attack all these different groups, and that does more harm than anything else. One of the chief helpers of Billy Graham said that he had much more trouble with the fighting fundamentalists than with the liberals. He said the fighting fundamentalists get terrifically bitter with him because they want him to come just for their churches. They don't want to have any other churches to have the rich experience of his meetings. He will not come to a city until all the churches of all denominations, liberal and fundamental alike, invite him. There's some big statesmanship, great qualities in Billy Graham, and that's one of the biggest. And so, don't cast that which is holy unto the dogs. They'll turn and rend you. They won't trample them under their feet. They'll turn and rend you. So I stood there in that church, and I was rent, and I was rent, and I was rent. And it spoiled the whole spirit of that meeting. Bertha Condé then went on to say, I addressed the students of University of Pennsylvania once as a great hall full, and I just started to speak, and all of a sudden I stopped and said, I came here to bring you a message of instruction, of inspiration and comfort. I thought you came with the spirit to welcome and open minds. I feel that you all have but one. There's one person has come to scoff. He's sitting to the little to the left of the center aisle. Let us take time now to let's have a silent prayer that either he will get up and go out or that spirit will get up and go out. Now, she had the gift that Dr. Carver had. Dr. Carver, standing, when I introduced him to a group of people, before I introduced him, he said, I can pick out the 12 most spiritual folks in that audience. And as they walked by him that day, he sat in his chair and didn't even look up. They all grabbed his hand or tried to, and he almost paid no attention. But every once in a while, he would take the hand, look up. Every one of them that he picked out, he just caught it like that, was already a son of God. I don't have that. I can tell when it's we lack the thing, but I can't pick out the spots, but Bertha Condé could. We were silent for 7 minutes, she said, and then something slumped. Something heavy dropped. And then I just spoke with power. When I got through, a man came up and said, you certainly had your nerve. There's a professor of psychology in this university that goes to every religious meeting, and he takes careful notes, and then in his psychology class the next day, he just tears that address to pieces. He is the only man, you're the only one here that didn't know who he was. He'll never do it again. Your intuitive faculty of sensing his presence revealed the fact there was something in the unseen that he was not aware of, and you've done something. Well, Jesus' advice is mighty good. The reason we go so far in the Camps Farthest Out is we come here, no one scoffing at any of these things we're saying. We don't all agree. Some of you will think that some of us go a little too far on the healing line, but we know that you all know the door is open. We don't stress healing very much. That's just merely one of the secondary things. And we may think that some think that we stress we don't talk enough about hellfire as much as some of you might like, and we don't try to save souls so much as treat you as if you were way down in the gutter, because you're the sifted ones, you're the Christians that have got to be re-Christianized. We don't have to bring you in to accept Jesus. That's all done. And we take our hat off to Billy Graham and let him go out and reach those folks. And so you see, we have little differences. It all blends together, and the power can be so tremendous. No scoffing. And then what's that you should do? What's the positive thing? And here's where Jesus not only was positive, but emphatic. You open a Reader's Digest, and you'll see a list of editors who are the greatest expert on condensation in the world. But they can't hold a candle to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They condense the greatest life ever told into 3, 4 little books. Why, the book of Mark you can read through in 1 hour. You can read the whole gospel through in one evening. And they can't afford to waste a word. Now, when you're not supposed to waste a word, look at this. Jesus repeats something 10 times. He wants to make it so emphatic. In relationship to God, ask and ye shall receive, seek and ye shall find, knock and it shall be opened unto you. 3 times, well, he's going to repeat it 3 more. For whosoever asketh shall receive, whosoever seeketh shall find, and whosoever knocketh it shall be opened unto him. 6 times, now 3 more. For which father of you, if your son asked for bread, would give him a stone? If he'd asked for an egg, would give him a scorpion? If he asked for a fish, would give him a serpent? 9 times, now he's going to give a 10th time. And if you, being evil, can give good gifts to your children when they ask, how much will a Father of love, the great God of infinite love, give good things to his children when they ask? Well, then he ends up that great sermon by saying, "Blessed are you if you hear these words of mine and go out and do them." That's where the coach of athletes come. I've told ministers that I had an advantage as a professor over them because they never could tell when it goes in one ear and out the other. But as a professor, I could give them an exam at the end of the week and make them write down everything I told them on a piece of paper. But a coach has a bigger advantage than the professor. He won't let them write it on a stop with a piece of paper. If you want to make my team and I tell you how to run the hurdles, you've got to run the hurdles. If you want to make my team and I tell you how to throw the shot, you've got to throw the shot. Don't write it on a piece of paper and then make the team know. And what's more, there's going to be no guesswork about it. They're going to use the stopwatch and the steel tape, absolute perfect measurements. And if you don't meet the test, you're not on the team. Now, that's what I like. What I'm doing right here to do, I'm not here as a preacher nor as a teacher. I'm here as a coach of athletes of the Spirit. And what I've told you tonight, I'm going to ask you to use before tomorrow night. Get your little gun ready, find something you want to aim at, and pull the trigger and see what happens. Well, that's what I wanted to do. And I began to look around, and the letter came, and there's my chance. A letter from a graduate of 20 years before, my classmate, Gwen, that Mrs. Clark and you love so much, has had an awful hard life, and now at last she has her 4 children around her. She has a nice position, a teaching job in Rapid City, South Dakota, and the doctor says she has cancer of the kidney, and he's going to operate on her next week, and he's told one of the nurses secretly that there's no chance, and they're not even to call him back again. After the operation, they're just to keep her shot with the morphine until she dies. I don't think it's fair for a good God to treat a sweet girl like Gwen. Now, I don't know how to pray, Prof, but you're a man of prayer. Won't you pray for Gwen? Well, I said, let's see. Now, I'll get my little instrument of prayer together and see how I am. In the first place, do I have any judgment against anyone? No. Am I willing to do unto others as they'd have me do unto them? Why, I sure would. Am I going to be careful not to expose this to any scoffing? You know, I should say I will. I'm not going to tell anyone. Maybe I better not tell my wife, not because she'd scoff at it, but because she has almost no faith. She's got a great fear of cancer. She has almost no faith, very little faith that prayer can help cancer. As a matter of fact, Lord, I don't know if I have any too much, so I better not weaken it by telling her. And now how about this other? Now all I need to do then is to talk to God as I would to a father with absolute faith that if I ask for bread, he won't give me a stone. So I went up to my room. I didn't usually do that. Shut the door, and I knelt down. I don't usually do that. But I was going to make a real clean the slate here for a real attempt. And then I said, now, Father, I have 2 lovely daughters. If one of them had a mighty hard life and at last had come into a happy heritage, I wouldn't pull her out of it because I love her. Now, Gwen isn't a daughter of mine. She's a daughter of yours. If anything happens to her, it'll be your hard luck and not mine. I'm going to trust you with her. I know that you love your daughters far more than I can love mine. And you have a power that I don't have. You could save your daughter, and I couldn't save mine unless you did it through me. But you have a wisdom that I don't have, and maybe in your great wisdom, maybe it'd be better for her to go to heaven. I know heaven's a wonderful place, but how about those children? How about what she'd like? Well, Lord, I'm going to trust your power. I'm going to trust your love. I'm going to trust your wisdom. I put her utterly in your hands, and here's where I relinquish. I'm going to fast from any more bother about it. I put her in your hands. I know whatever you want to do with your daughter will be okay, and I got a peace. Went downstairs and left the whole thing in the hands of the Lord. 10 days later, a letter came. After 10 days, the doctor said, after a week, the doctor said, if she's making such a fight for life, I'll come up and take a look. And he said, by Jove, the operation was a success. And the other kidney's making perfect compensation. Why, she's going to live. 6 months later, I got another letter. Gwen is healthier than she's ever been, but the biggest miracle that happened in Rapid City, South Dakota, wasn't what happened to Gwen, it's what happened to the doctor. He takes God into his operating room now every time. I was giving this address in Miami, in the largest Baptist church in the South. And let me say here, just about this quarrel of turning and rending you, the Southern Baptists tend to do that a lot. But on our trip around the world, the Southern Baptists, wherever we went, they were the ones that rushed out and met us. They were the ones that just sat at our feet. They were the ones that are arranging for Roland Brown, who happens to be a Baptist, by the way, but maybe a little bit under suspicion over here by a lot. And over there, they just felt that we were the saviors of the world. So I take your hat off to Southern Baptists. They've got the right thing. They want to go far, but they've just got some wrong leadership over here, and they like to turn some of them and rend you, forgetting to read the Bible and to read a description of themselves in that regard. I was giving this address in this greatest Baptist church in the South, and there's a radio, 2,000 people listening here, and I don't know how many outside. And that afternoon I got a telephone call from a woman. She said, I'm a bed case. One of my kidneys is gone, and the other's in constant hemorrhage. Every Sunday morning I tune into Dr. Sockman, but this morning my radio stuck, and I couldn't get it past a certain wavelength, and all of a sudden a voice said, now you'll hear Dr. Glenn Clark of St. Paul, author of The Soul's Sincere Desire, speak on the Sermon on the Mount. And when you told about that incident, about that operation for that kidney, my hemorrhage stopped. You roused my faith so tremendously, as never had been before. Why, here had been your book, The Soul's Sincere Desire, at my bedside all these years. Never thought I'd hear you. So I was all expectancy. And when you told of that, my hemorrhage stopped. The doctor's come this afternoon, and he said, maybe it's permanent. And if it is, I can come and hear you at Coral Gables tomorrow afternoon. She came the next afternoon. She could only stay for the afternoon. She didn't feel safe to remain for this evening, but the Tuesday she came not only for afternoon, for the evening. Years went by, she came to Camps Farthest Out. She became head of the spiritual life group work of the churches in Miami. Merely to hear something about this Sermon on the Mount over the radio does things to people. Well, when I was in Houston, down here, Mrs. Tellefson was my hostess, and she said, there's a teacher of our, there's a Gwen, that has a wonderful class, a school for special students, that is, rather rich people's students, and my grandchildren go there, and she's found you're in town, she wants to come and see you. Well, she came. The Gwen that I had seen healed 30 years before, or 25 years before, and I was to speak in Houston on, I forget what it was, and as I rose to speak, here she came walking in. And so I just shifted subject, and I gave this talk. She'd never heard the background of how she was healed. Actually, you want to find Gwen, you'll find her in Houston, head of that wonderful school. Now, what I'm talking about is just right down to hard facts. The way to become an angel is to take the Sermon on the Mount. Don't feel you have to read the whole Bible, but we're going to take up a number of things in the Bible. And tomorrow I think I'll take the Lord's Prayer, and Tuesday morning I think I'm going to take the one great commandment, the first great commandment. If you can take any one of these and live it, it's a doorway into angelhood. Be thou perfect as thy Father in heaven is perfect. Well, let's just before we close, every one of you think of something you'd like to aim your prayer. Now, isn't this strange? This gun, the gun is supposed to be destructive and destroy. This instrument that you'll find in the 7th chapter is an instrument that for saving, not for destruction, but for salvation. Find something you'd like to aim at, and just for a few moments, if you can't do it permanently, just drop all your criticism and judgment. Drop it all out. For a few minutes anyway, you'd be willing to do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. We're not going to do any scoffing of this, and we're not going out and expose it to anybody to laugh at and call us crackpots. They're all safe here. And then just know that if you ask for bread, that your Father's going to have far more love for you than you'd have for your children, and that he'll give your request. So let us close our eyes, and each one just quietly get our aim set.